Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee. On behalf of your chairman this evening, Councillor Rhys-Thomas, I'm going to open the meeting and start with some housekeeping matters. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Please could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up by using the raise hand function? And please could all members ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. Please feel free though to use the chat function to highlight any technical issues for myself or Councillor Thomas as chair this evening. If any participant has any difficulty hearing or being heard when they're addressing the committee, then please could they raise that with myself or Councillor Thomas. But please could they try turning off their webcam in the first instance, as this can help with broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth. So at least they can maintain their connection until we can get them back up and running. Okay, Chair, that confirms the housekeeping for this evening. Over to yourself. Oh, sorry, Chair, just one more thing. Just to highlight for the new councillors that are on with us this evening, you do have obviously the elected members of the committee, but for this Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee, you also have co-opted members. So there may be some new faces that you don't recognise, but hopefully we'll get to know each other as we go through. So you have co-opted members with voting rights, and you also have co-opted observer members. You also have two guests that are with us this evening, supporting Charis Pritchard from the Central South Consortium. So we may need to do some introductions as we go through this evening, Chair. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. Welcome everyone. Croeso. It's a great honour to be chairman of the committee. My name's Rhys, and it's a new experience for me, as I'm sure it is for many of you. So we'll get through this together, and Amy's on hand to correct me if I go off piste, which might happen at some point during this evening. I just want to start by saying that I'm disappointed that we're not in a hybrid meeting tonight, and I hope the council will be more amenable to having hybrid meetings from now on, like most of the other councils in Wales. So now we've got that out of the way, I want to move on to part one of the formal proceedings. So agenda point one, appointing a vice chair. So is there anyone who'd like to nominate someone for vice chair? Councillor Jane Norman, got a hand up.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Helen Payne as Vice Chair, please.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Norman. Do we have a seconder?
I would like a second, please.
Councillor Marshalsea. Brilliant. Any other nominations? Okay. Councillor Payne, congratulations on being Vice Chair. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Rhys. Just really happy to be Vice Chair. I think somebody else has got their sound on. So really happy. I've been in education for a number of years, 42 years as a youth and community worker. I've worked in 3 authorities across and been an officer in education as well. So I'm delighted, and I'm sure we can do lots of good work together.
Hello.
Thank you, Councillor Payne, for that.
Thank
I look
you,
forward
Rhys.
to working with you. And yeah, I'm not sure who it is, but I think someone might have their microphone on. So if we could make sure that those are switched off. Thank you. So second of all, apologies for absence.
Rhys.
Yes, hello.
It's Russell, yeah, Russell Godfrey. I did have my hand up to propose myself.
Oh, sorry, Russell, I didn't see you. Would anyone like to...
Councillor Godfrey, have you joined us on the telephone, or have you joined us as a video meeting?
I'm on the video meeting on the laptop.
Oh, right. Okay, no problem. I was just checking because you do sound very underwater at the moment. You sound far away.
I have the headphones on. I'm taking them off now. Is that better?
That is a little bit better. Yes, thank you. So sorry about that. I didn't see your hand either, so I am very sorry. So do you mind, Chairman, if we just take Councillor Godfrey's nomination and see if we have a seconder for that?
absolutely. Apologies, Councillor Godfrey. I didn't hear you there or see you. Yeah, okay. So thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Do we have a proposer for Councillor Godfrey? Okay. So in that case, then Councillor Payne will be the vice chair of the committee. Okay, thank you. I won't ask you to speak again, Helen, but thanks thanks for the input. Okay, so agenda point 2. Apologies. I've received an apology from Councillor Hennessy. Have we received any others, Amy?
I have received a apology from Rebecca Mateo, who's one of our co-opted members, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Asbury?
Yes, I'm sorry, but it's a big clash for me tonight. I have to go to the Dinas Powers Community Council, full council, and I'm chairing it. So okay. I'll stay as long as I can tonight, and if you don't mind, I will just put on the chat. Sorry, I have to leave now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for attending in the first instance anyway. So brilliant. Thanks for that, everyone. So moving on to point 3, minutes of the meeting.
Chair, I think Councillor Godfrey wishes to come in as well again.
Just to say that I'm chairing a meeting at 7 o'clock as well, so I can. Okay. But it's the local branch AGM, and I'm chairing that. So just to apologise in advance.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Noted.
Thank you. We'll get through as much as we can for then. So point number 3, the minutes of the last meeting on 7th of April 2022. Now, most of us won't have been here for that one, so I suggest that we just note those minutes.
I'm happy to move, Chair.
Can I please?
I was there and happy to move.
And I will second that.
Brilliant. Thanks both.
Thank you.
So that's noted, and we'll move on. Agenda item 4, receiving declarations of interest. So if there are any, or if Amy has any, then say. No. Just want to check I haven't missed anyone. Good. So we'll move on to point 5. So we've got a presentation now from Paula Ham, Introduction to Learning and Culture. So if Paula's here.
Hi, Chair.
Hi.
I am here. I'm going to share the presentation on the screen now. Just bear with me a second. Right, that's just loaded. Are you able to see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Right, okay, and now I'm conscious that those of you who are on other scrutiny committees might have already heard this presentation, or you've got this coming up again. So apologies if we're repeating things that you've already heard. And of course, information about our vision and our corporate plan and our delivery plan you will have heard about during the induction for members too, but I'm going to go over that again. Okay, so our vision for the Vale of Glamorgan is strong communities with a bright future. And when we talk about our vision, we think about the outcomes we want to achieve, and those are an active and healthy Vale, an inclusive and safe Vale, and an environmentally responsible and prosperous Vale, and an aspirational and culturally vibrant Vale. The outcomes shape the objectives we set ourselves and the actions that we want to take. So our visions and the outcomes are linked to contributing to the Wellbeing Goals for Wales, which are part of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. The work we do and how members make decisions and scrutinise those decisions is enhanced by the Act, and by using the 5 ways of working as a lens through which to look at and consider things differently. So those 5 ways of working are shown there on the slide. They're themed under long-term prevention, integration, collaboration and involvement. And you'll notice that when we prepare reports for both Cabinet and Scrutiny, we must consider how we contribute to those 5 ways of working. So in terms of delivering our vision, we develop a 5-year corporate plan, and the plan sets out our commitments to improve well-being, and it guides the way in which we work and how we allocate our resources. The corporate plan contains 4 cross-cutting wellbeing objectives that you'll see there on the left-hand side of the screen. And each service contributes in some way to achieving those outcomes. So objective 1, working with and for our communities, we want to get you all involved and to let you know about our work, and we want to change the way in which we work to make sure we're prepared for the future. We want to provide good customer service and a service that meets different needs. Also want people to be able to, we want more people to be able to speak Welsh, and we want our staff and members to be able to do their best. Under the second objective, supporting learning, employment and sustainable economic growth, we want to make sure that all of our children have the opportunity to learn in modern environments and to ensure that they're all supported to achieve. We want to give people and businesses support, advice and opportunities to help with jobs, money and skills. And we want people to volunteer, and we want to make sure the Vale is a better place in which to live, work and travel. Under objective 3, supporting people at home and in the community, we want everyone to have a healthy and active lifestyle and to encourage walking and cycling. We want everyone to enjoy leisure, the arts and culture, and want to make sure that everybody gets the care and support that they need. We want to keep people safe at home and in their community and have access to good quality housing. And then objective 4, respect, enhance and enjoy our environment. We want to look after and protect our environment for now and for the future. We'll work with others to sustain local facilities such as public toilets, parks, play areas. We'll reduce waste and lower our carbon emissions and negative impacts on the environment. We'll work to minimise pollution and flooding. The commitments for the 5 years are articulated in our annual delivery plan. And in this year's annual delivery plan, there are 6 themes, which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen there. And so our actions in the annual delivery plan have a particular emphasis on those areas of activity. We report performance quarterly to each scrutiny committee, and I believe you're going to receive our quarter 4 performance monitoring report at your next meeting. Let's just move on. So the wellbeing objectives and the 6 themes cut across the work of all of the committees. And each committee focuses on a particular objective. And so for healthy living, sorry, I think we've got the wrong slide in here, actually. We've got the healthy living and social care committee slide in here instead of your scrutiny committee slide. I do apologise. But by memory,
Paula, I'm wondering if it's the next slide over, because I think there may be a slide for each committee.
There is, but no, this was right. Just bear with me a sec. On my copy, on my copy of the presentation, I have got the right slide, but you're not seeing it on the screen for some reason. So I'm not sure why that's happening. Right, okay.
It's okay.
I shall just try and bring up the right slide. So I'm not sure what's happening here. That's quite bizarre, actually. Right. There we have it, learning and culture. So the Learning and Culture Committee covers schools, naturally, pupil support, school improvement and school support, and that's very wide-ranging. It also covers post-16 education and training, so it covers the wider skills agenda and adult community learning. It covers libraries, the youth service, Equalities, Welsh language and arts development. So that, in a nutshell, is what you'll cover as a scrutiny committee. As I said, it doesn't look very much when you look at it on the screen there, but it is quite an extensive remit. So there'll be plenty of work for you to get involved in. Now, my next slide is introducing you to members of the team, the heads of service and our principal school improvement, improvement partner from the Central South Consortium. Now, for some reason, the presentation I'm sharing with you isn't, as I said, isn't the one which I've been working on. So it doesn't have that slide on it. So if you'll just bear with me, if I can just close this presentation and reshare the one that I have open on my screen, so you can meet some of the heads of service and our senior improvement partner. So just bear with me, and I hope this works.
That's no problem, Paula.
No. Let's have a look. I'm going to have to unshare my screen, I believe. No, right. Can you see that?
Yeah, the yellow highlighted text.
Right.
I think we're seeing the draft version, Paula. So if I
I'm imagining what they look like.
they're all here, I think, in with us tonight, so they can probably introduce themselves rather than us fiddle with the presentation. Best laid plans. So we have Morwen Hudson, who's our head of standards and provision. I don't know whether you can see Morwen there on the left-hand side of the screen. So Morwen covers services for vulnerable children. She covers inclusion and well-being and youth service. And she also links through to the Central South Consortium from a school improvement perspective. So she's one of the main links with our principal improvement partner. Next, we have David Davis. And David's there at the bottom of my screen anyway. David is our head of ALN and well-being. And David covers ALN, which covers a wide area, complex needs, support to schools for ALN, and also the educational psychology service. But David also covers areas such as early years provision and the skills agenda. So as well as part of the wellbeing agenda, so quite a mixed bag there. We have Trevor Baker. I don't know whether Trevor's actually on the call, but Trevor covers the rest of the directorate, really. So he covers our support services for schools such as finance and IT, school admissions, also our 21st Century Schools programme, which is significant, and a range of other support services. He also covers the arts, community learning, adult community learning, and libraries. Okay, so quite a wide and varied remit then there. And we have Charis Pritchard, which is she's on the screen. She's our principal improvement partner. Charis works for the Central South Consortium Joint Education Service, but she works very closely with us, and through Charis and through our school improvement partners, we engage with our schools in terms of school improvement. So Charis works very closely with the rest of my senior leadership team. So those are the key members of staff you'll be meeting as a scrutiny committee, but you'll also be meeting a number of managers who work under each of those heads of service, and indeed for the Central South Consortium. You'll be also hearing from many of our schools. We try to encourage schools to talk to our scrutiny committee about the work that they're doing, and I think it helps to bring reports alive when you can hear about how things are operating on the ground. Okay. So that concludes my presentation. I do apologise about there being seemingly two different presentations about, but hopefully you are now familiar with the remit of your scrutiny committee.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. I think it was better that we got to see them face to face on camera. I think that was a more interactive way of doing it, which was very good. Thanks, Paul. That was really interesting and useful. So I propose now that we just note the report and move on, so we can have a proposer and a seconder for that.
Yeah, can I propose, please?
Thanks, Helen.
Yeah, I'll second Emma Goodjohn.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. So what I suggest we do now, because I know we've got a couple of guests waiting who don't necessarily need to be waiting here for an age, is that we basically swap agenda items 2 and 6. So move agenda item 7 up. So the recruit, recover and raise standards section, because we've got Chris and Rianne who we can let speak sooner than they'd have to otherwise, so they can get on and enjoy their evenings or do other important things. So as long as there's no objections to that, I think that's fine with everyone. I'll take that as a yes. Good. Is that okay with you, Charis?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor Thomas. So are you happy that I make a start then on the presentation?
Absolutely, please do.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. Noswaith dda gyfeillion. Good to see and to meet some of you for the first time. As Paula mentioned in the presentation, my name is Charis Pritchard and I'm the Principal Improvement Partner in the Central South Consortium, but working very closely with a team in the Vale of Glamorgan. And just to update you really, in terms of some of you have heard a number of presentations already during the last academic year. Those of you who are members of the Scrutiny Committee last year, you've had several presentations on the theme of impact of COVID-19 on schools. So there has been a presentation on remote and blended learning. There's been another presentation on the impact of COVID on pupils' well-being, and another presentation on the impact of COVID-19 on pupils' literacy skills. So in a sense, there's a continuity in terms of the theme here tonight. And this report considers how schools in the Vale have used the Recruit, Recover, Raise Standards, Accelerating Learning Programme grant. It's quite a mouthful when it comes to the name of the grant. For short, we tend to call it the RRS grant. So you'll see reference to that in the written report. But this is the grant from Welsh Government the schools have received to support learners that have been impacted most by the pandemic. So I'm aware you've had access to the report, the written report prior to the meeting, but I'll just take you through some of the brief headings. You'll see as well in the report that there's 6 case studies from schools. You've got a primary school, a nursery school, a school from the Welsh medium sector, a secondary school and a special school. And we're fortunate tonight as well to have Rhian Andrews, the head of St Barrick with us, and Charis Pritchard, the head of Ysgol Derry with us. And, you know, both of them will be hopefully bringing the report to life, as Paula mentioned. You know, sort of, it's something we like to do in Scrutiny, so you can hear firsthand from schools themselves. But I'll take you briefly to begin with through some of the headings in the report, and then we'll hear directly from the two head teachers. So in terms of the report, if we consider the report in Appendix A to begin with, in terms of background information, you'll see on page 3, there's reference there in terms of the funding that has been allocated to schools in relation to this grant. You'll see back in June 2020, almost at the start of the pandemic, that the Welsh Government announced additional funding of over 29 million to schools. That there's been additional funding added to that in July 2020, over 15 million target specifically at post-16 learners, and then additional funding again for the 2021-22 academic year of £35.8 million. Now, in terms of that funding, there's an indication in Appendix 3 of the range of funding allocated to schools in the Vale of Glamorgan. Now, in terms of how schools have used that grant, most schools across the Vale have used the grant to appoint additional staff. So that's enabled schools then to use those additional staff to provide targeted support for key individuals, or it's enabled them to teach other classes to free the teachers to actually provide the support for pupils. So it's been used both ways in schools, and only in a very few cases additional staff haven't been appointed. In those cases, schools have used supply cover as and when needed to cover those classes and to provide support. In terms of the types of activity, at the bottom of page 4, there's references to types of activity that the funding has enabled. So there's reference to intervention programmes in terms of pupils' literacy and numeracy skills, also a range of well-being support programmes. And then particularly at the start of the pandemic, there was a focus on developing pupils' information technology skills, particularly in relation to make sure that they were able to access any remote or blended learning. In the secondary sector, there's been a focus on transition, particularly for vulnerable pupils moving from primary to secondary. There's also been a strong focus on Key Stage 4 and post-16 due to the examination focus there, and ensuring specialist teaching, particularly if you think about the core subjects of English, maths and science. There's also been in secondary school a focus on after-school support, such as homework clubs. And I will make reference here as well to Welsh medium schools in particular. In terms of the Welsh medium schools, all of them in the Vale have used the funding or part of the funding to develop pupils' Welsh language skills, but with a particular focus on supporting those pupils who come from English-speaking homes. And I know when Rhian Andrews will discuss the work of St Barrick in relation to this grant, that will be a theme that she'll be making reference to. Because if you think about pupils in the Welsh medium sector, if they came from English-speaking homes, some of them, not all, but some of them weren't having access and not hearing the language on a daily basis. So that was a key focus then when, sort of with schools in supporting those pupils. In terms of the range of pupils being supported, it was very much up to the schools themselves to identify which pupils needed the support. So there was flexibility, and schools identified, sort of their own particular groups. In some cases, it was pupils that were eligible for free school meals, your pupils with additional learning needs, pupils with English as an additional language. And as I've mentioned, in a number of Welsh medium schools, it was pupils, who came from English-speaking homes. But that, sort of there were flexibility for school to address the target group and to expand the target group. And in some cases, pupils who had difficulties with having access to IT equipment and accessing learning online were also included as part of the provision and support. In primary schools, there was no clear pattern or trend across the local authority in terms of the age range. Most schools supported pupils between 3 to 11 in terms of primary schools. In the secondary sector, there was a stronger focus to begin with on post-16 and Key Stage 4, but more recently that support has moved. As you'll see in some of the case studies, in terms of Stanwell in particular, you'll see that they're increasing the support now in relation to Key Stage 3 pupils to address targeted needs. On page 6 of the report, there's a reference to the range of monitoring activities undertaken by schools to capture really the impact of this grant. So you'll see there's reference to making use of analysis of data, if it's pupils' literacy skills, reading ages, numeracy skills, pupils' progress data, and using a range of tools to capture pupils' well-being as well. There's also attendance and exclusion data that's been used by schools to support the impact of this grant, and also findings from monitoring activities. So that could be listening to learners, listening to the pupils, undertaking learning walks, looking at examples of pupils' work. And sometimes that has happened alongside the improvement partner from Central South Consortium as well. There's also been a focus on getting feedback from parents and any external agencies that have been, sort of been working closely with schools and targeted pupils. Obviously, you can imagine the grant has been welcomed by schools, but it has brought its challenges, so that you will see a reference at the end of page 6 onto page 7, a reference to some of the challenges faced by schools. As you can imagine, additional grant, appointing additional staff, it has been difficult for all schools to find the right staff to support the pupils. That's been true across the sector. But I would say particularly for Welsh medium schools, it has been difficult and a particular challenge. And, schools had plans in place in terms of using the grant, and you will see it's a common theme in the case studies, with the need for teachers to self-isolate and teachers being absent due to COVID and other illnesses. Some of the planned interventions had to be cancelled at short notice, and some of the staff being used to support other classes in order to enable schools to remain open for pupils. So possibly some of the planned interventions haven't happened, as intended. And similarly, pupils themselves who were supposed to be in receipt of targeted support have also had to self-isolate or have been off for various reasons. So sometimes, that has impacted on some of the planned work. You will also see that there's a reference, and it's coming through in the case study for Wickham Macross, that occasionally with some of the smaller primary schools in particular, the amount of funding that schools have received, some of them, is quite minimal. You will see in Appendix 3 there's quite a range in terms of the support and funding allocated. So with some of the smaller schools where there has been small, they've been in receipt of smaller amounts of funding, they've had to plan quite carefully and possibly link up with other grants that they've access to make sure that they've got better impact on the work of the pupils. So in terms of Wickham Macross, for example, you'll see in the case study there that they've combined the use of this grant with a pupil development grant. And just one other challenge in terms of staff absences, and trying to difficulties with finding supply, especially since September this academic year, has resulted possibly in some of the planned monitoring activities not happening as originally planned because of the pressure that a number of schools were under in terms of staffing and ensuring that we had, pupils being taught by classroom teachers, and that was a priority rather than possibly undertaking monitoring. So some of the planned monitoring has had to be deferred until later on in the academic year. In terms of the next steps in relation to this grant, there is in close working with the improvement partners in Central South Consortium, and they're continuing to work closely with schools to monitor the impact of the grant. And also moving on and thinking ahead to next academic year, there will be discussions being undertaken this half term to start to think about the priorities in terms of the school development plan moving forwards for the next academic year. And you will see in the case studies that there's references to areas of concerns in relation to the impact of COVID that schools have identified. So the ongoing discussions now relate to how schools can further address some of the concerns identified as a result of COVID. So I'm conscious that's just been a whistle-stop tour in terms of the overall paper, but just to give you a flavour of the grant, we have got, as I mentioned, two head teachers here today to bring, in a sense, the information about their school and how the use of the grant has impacted on practice. So I'll ask Charis Pritchard to present in the first instance. Chris, as I'm sure many of you know, is the head teacher of Ysgol-y-Derry. So can I pass over to you, Chris? Diolch yn fawr.
Thanks, Charis, and thanks for the opportunity to speak, Chair, and to speak to the committee. I'm head teacher of Ysgol-y-Derry. We are your additional learning needs provision, where we meet the needs of those pupils who can't be met in our mainstream schools. So we have provision for all schools. Just a quick bit of background, we've approaching about 380 pupils on the one site, aged between 3 and 19. All pupils, virtually all pupils, have statements of special educational needs or IDPs, and we cover a full range from severe learning difficulties, profound and multiple learning difficulties, moderate learning difficulties, autistic spectrum, social, emotional, mental health, and more lately, extreme anxiety. And the ability ranges within the school. And if we were to take just the sixth form, the ranges there would range from pre-reception in terms of ability, preschool, all the way to A-level, advanced level. So there's a big range and a huge kind of age range and ability range as well. For us, all of our pupils have what we define as a triad of impairment. So they all have, to some greater or lesser extent, communication issues, sensory integration issues in terms of the feel of their body, where it is in space, and their reaction to different things, and also social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. And over COVID, this was further compounded by a sense of isolation, absence from school, and many of our pupils don't have friendship groups, don't, routinely go out with friends, and people, of course, couldn't go out with friends either. And they do as well, particularly with the younger autistic people, tend to be very egocentric. So all these things were being compounded through the first lockdown. So we decided that we would augment what was already in place. We have a pupil support team in place, and they work on all those aspects I've just spoken about with pupils. They work on regulating pupils, and then we talk about when pupils are well regulated, when we've got their sensory issues right, their communication issues right, and we get them in a good place in terms of their well-being, then they're ready to learn. And that's a key component for us. Unless those pupils are ready to learn, then it's pointless putting them in a class in front of a teacher. So that's a big part of our work. So we used the grant to augment the team and bring in another member full-time of the pupil support team. We knew that we were going to have particularly younger pupils coming in who were dysregulated, well out of their usual routine, anxious parents who perhaps didn't want to send them in. This was before vaccines and everything, so that in 2020 it seems to have all blurred in a bit, doesn't it? It all seems like the same time period, so I have to really think back on it. But what was really profound for us as well is we had 40 new starters who we pretty much hadn't met, and we hadn't undertaken any transition activities. So we had paper information, but we hadn't had eyes or seen these pupils. So we appointed a further member into the team, and we decided that staff member would be focused in the primary sector and provide support for the dysregulated pupils. So I'm going to call her Molly because it's easier for me. So Molly, well, is her name. So Molly started to work with these young people, these young children. She would meet and greet pupils. She'd reassure them. She would go out to parents' homes if necessary to talk to the parents, reassure parents, and gradually work on bringing the pupils in. It was a very, very reactive role at that time, responding to need as we saw it coming through the door. I think over time that's become more proactive, and so we're able to anticipate and work forward. And now, after 18 months, Molly's worked with most of the 16 classes in the primary sector, either on a whole class or one-to-one basis, knows pupils very well, and she's very good at recognising the particular pupils we might be targeting who are coming in dysregulated. And a dysregulated pupil can really disrupt the education for an entire class for long periods of time. So for us, that idea of meeting and greeting at the door and taking them and doing some regulation work in whichever way it is, it may be physical, it may be talking to them, it may just be making sure they've had food, those sorts of things, and then getting them ready and putting them in a place where they can go into class. She's also worked closely with parents and carers of targeted pupils, and that's been really important because we've been helping parents to develop strategies for coping strategies and regulation strategies because these pupils are displaying the same challenging behaviours at home as well. And where necessary, when we were closing classes as we were through September 21 almost through to Easter, and that probably was one of the most difficult times of COVID in terms of class closures and absences of staff. We were running around an average of 50 to 60 staff off every day, and you know, closures to go with that. Then that work at home and keeping that contact was vital as well. So we've been monitoring that. We've got fairly sophisticated monitoring software which lets us analyse behaviour, lets us analyse well-being, it lets us analyse positives and negatives, it lets us analyse when and where, if behaviours both good and bad occur, and what the precursors might be or the aftermath. We've had feedback from parents and carers, and all of the pupils, which is striking, have demonstrated a reduction in challenging or negative behaviours. And what the team have now been focused on is where, let's say, a pupil is scratching at someone to get attention because they want something, then what the team do is work around transferring that into a useful skill to get attention. So we may say, you know, work with them, so you don't need to scratch anymore. If you've got this card, you can hold it up, those sorts of things. And then the child knows that actually I don't need to hurt someone to get attention. I can get attention in different ways. And they're very skilled at that. And that's been very, very successful. We've seen an improvement in the engagement between school and parents. And I think COVID, if it did anything in a strange way, brought us closer to many parents. We had to work much more closely with them and support them through both the hub phase and further forward. There's also that team also have an impact on staff morale, which is also really important because they feel that in times of crisis they're well supported, and there are experts to come in and work with those pupils either in class or to take them from class and to work in other areas. And in terms of SO's broader impact, the fact that that support team are able to deal with those crises supports us as senior leadership team, which allows us to focus on other matters, because very often, and I'm sure Rhiannon would agree that, you know, very often the challenging behaviour ends up sat in the heads room rather than anywhere else. So actually it has freed up the leadership team as well. The role has been, the enhancement of that team has been really successful. We further enhanced that team, and we are now considering a similar team to work within. You'll be aware, or you may not be aware, that the PRU has now become part of the school as a department of the school, and we are now looking to bring staff in a similar role with similar skill sets in to work there as well, to work with, again, pupils who are coming in with really challenging kind of social, emotional and mental health issues, and to pick them up as they come in and to really get some early intervention early in the school day before they even get into classrooms. So for us, it's been very, very positive. It's supported our core purpose in many ways around that regulation of pupils. It's been put to good use. It's been very welcome, and we're going to continue with that, and we will continue with it beyond the grant as well, because I guess that once you've opened that box and seen it could be that good, actually, you wouldn't want to close it again, and it's working so well. We want to continue with it. So that's kind of, Charis said about 5 minutes or so. So I think I've done it in about 5 minutes or so. I'm happy to take any questions from any councillors or members of Scrutiny, if there are any.
Yeah, I think, shall we take Rhiannon first, and then we'll sort of, so everyone can fling the questions at both of you if necessary, Chris.
Okay.
Great, but thanks for that. So if we could get Rhiannon, if you could give a presentation. Chris did very well on stick of 5 minutes. I'm sure you will as well.
Thank you, Rhys. Yes, thank you for the opportunity of coming here this evening to speak to you. Well, Ysgol Sant Badrig is a Welsh medium school in Barry, and during the course of pandemic, when we looked at the needs of the school and needs of the children in our school, we felt that the greatest need for the learners in Sant Badrig was to address the lack of opportunity they would have had to develop their Welsh language skills. We're a school of just under 250 pupils, and I would say there are just about half a dozen pupils that come from homes where Welsh is the main language. So most pupils of the school come from English-speaking homes. So that was the challenge that was faced with us. And as Charis said, that was recognised by Welsh Government. So there was a significant top-up of the grant for Welsh medium schools to address this issue. And that's what we did. The grant allowed us to employ two teachers. We first thought that the best use of the grant was to employ two teachers part-time to work according to the data when children came back to school from being at hub and from learning at home. It looked like years 4, 5 and 6, the upper classes of the school. They hadn't practiced their Welsh for many months, and access to the curriculum and learning and the skills that would be required of pupils of that age had greatly diminished. So having pupils, having staff, additional staff, allowed then the actual class teacher to work in small groups on precision teaching to enhance their literacy skills, the oracy and reading being predominant. And that's what it was up until about March, and then we went into lockdown, didn't we, spring 2021. So when that happened, as a school, we felt very strongly that there should be a strong focus on providing daily live lessons. So there was online learning, and that was in many different shapes and sizes and forms. But in our school, we felt the need that all children should have access to daily live lessons. And there was a combination of that. There was a whole school check-in through assemblies on a weekly basis. There would be class check-ins on a daily basis. But more than anything, we offered then small group live sessions, daily live sessions. We had additional staff. So the staff we had employed were put to good use, and then that wasn't such a workload on all my teachers and learning support, so the workload could be shared more equally. And that was the aim. So children would have access to listening to Welsh from their teacher, from their learning support assistant, whether it be through whole school activities, and then they would have the chance to speak Welsh in the small group live sessions. And then having that grant enabled us to do that. At the start of the summer term then, when we came back to school and reassessed the data, it quickly became apparent then that we needed to deploy the grant to other areas of the school. The older children, which we felt the need at the beginning of that academic year, were suitably making progress that enabled them to carry on with their learning. And what we found, it was the younger children, the foundation phase children, that now needed that support. Live lessons with 3 to 7 year olds, funnily enough, don't work as well as what they do with the older children. You couldn't have that same engagement from them. They really do in Welsh medium benefit from the immersion technique that we do in school. So any Welsh medium primary school, the language of the curriculum in the foundation phase from years 3 to 7 is all through the medium of Welsh. Every subject. When it comes to Key Stage 2, it is still every subject through the medium of Welsh, for the exception of English, and English as a subject is introduced in year 3. So the children in age 3 to 7, if you think most of them come from English medium homes, they wouldn't have had that ample opportunity to be immersed. So we redeployed staff, and they went down into the reception year 1 and year 2 to make sure that there were plenty of available adults to model the language when the children were at their activities and in their free play. And that has been the decision for this academic year as well. So we have changed, rather than teachers, we have employed learning support assistants for this year, which has enabled us then, these 3 additional learning support assistants through the grant, has enabled every class in the school then to have a learning support assistant, which in Key Stage 2 is not necessarily the norm. So it is regarded as a luxury that every class has one, but that teacher has an additional adult then to support the language. And down in the foundation phase then, every group or children that are at work, whether it be play or focus task, do have those adults to encourage the use of Welsh language, to feed vocabulary, to make sure they become fluent. I would say now, where we are now, the language skills of the children in foundation phase are starting to become on par of what we were expected pre-COVID. So it certainly has had a positive impact. We are certainly seeing children in year 1, especially now, being fluent where they weren't, say, year 1 this time last year. Of course, additional bodies make a difference when you're trying to immerse children in the Welsh medium language, and that certainly has had a positive impact. It would be nice to have the grant every year to have additional staff to do this. I will not lie. The recruitment of Welsh medium staff has been extremely difficult. So you might, believe it or not, you're in a position, you have money, and you can't find the people to spend it on. That has been a challenge because you want people who are good linguistic models, who can speak Welsh correctly and model that for pupils. On a plus note, the 3 that we have employed this year through the grant, we have been recruiting staff ready for September, and they have all had permanent positions on our staff come September. So the grant has allowed us to recruit more staff, train them up in the ways that we like to immerse children in language, and they've secured a permanent job with us. So yes, it's been a positive step, and the main ideal that we wanted was to improve children's linguistic skills with the medium of Welsh, and I would say that grant has allowed us to do it. The sustainability might be difficult if the grant is taken away. The additional adults really have made that difference. But that's proof that the people that are in the classes can make a difference.
Good.
So, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rhian. That was great. So I'll open it up now to questions to you both, if that's okay. So I'm sure the good counsellors have some questions about what you've just been saying. So if people want to, I can only see a few people on camera. So if you're on cam, you can raise your hand or raise it virtually. I don't mind to ask a question. So Councillor Penn, I can see you've got your hand up.
Thank you. There was a lot to read, but I managed to get through quite a lot of it, and it's just a couple of things. Rhian, you just said that in Welsh, year 1 and 2 levels are going up. At Cogan School, it showed that social, emotional, and behavioural and physical development levels were lower with children coming in after lockdown. Have those improved since 2021? The other thing was most schools showed a reduction of enrichment experiences. Are those starting to creep up with now we don't have lockdowns and things? Are they getting out more? And is there any extra funding to try and catch up with those, outside experiences? And just with the Welsh, we've been talking about Welsh. I was a governor at Landoc, and we had a Iestyn report, which was exceptional. But the place that they were told they could really improve on was their Welsh provision. Is there extra funding that the school can apply for the Welsh provision and getting that up, if that will make sense?
Who do you want to answer what, Councillor? I can take the one on the sort of interventions and the widening part from our point of view, if that's helpful. So we have a wide range of interventions at school, all of which were shut down through COVID. So we were in very tight contact groups, and given the vulnerability of our pupils, it was even more difficult. Those have gradually been opening up since February half term, since after February half term, and I'm pleased to say are now completely reopened. So everything we were doing before and all the things that the pupils would get involved in are now back in place. And that's been really, really powerful and useful. We finally come out of PPE. We didn't come out of PPE until about 4 weeks ago. So opening all that up has been excellent, actually, and all that is now back. Our pupils have tolerated it all very well. They've I think one of the strangest things is they don't recognize many of our staff without masks on. So there was one youngster said to one of the senior leadership team, "I'm sorry, I don't know who you are," when they were talking to him. And so member team member said, "Oh, I know who you are now." So it's but no, all our stuff is back open again and going well. We did have a lot of problems, as Rhian just said, around recruitment, even in just to having to staff to cover. That's been almost impossible, but that's improved and is improving now. In terms of Welsh, etc. Rhian, do you want to?
In fact, in terms of English medium schools, accessing additional funding, I to be honest, I wouldn't know, councillor, about that. I know there's programmes, Welsh Government programmes, that teachers can go on the sabbatical to improve their Welsh language. So you could have more fluent teachers there. There's also working in collaboration with Welsh schools. You can team up with the Welsh school. I do it myself with Barry Island Primary. So we work collaboratively on projects. So that is one way, school to school, improving Welsh, and each class, each year group is working with the fellow year group in Barry Island. So, you know, it would be encouraging if Llandoch could make sort of contact with the Welsh medium school and think of collaborating on a project. There are things like that you could do. They've been quite successful. There's also the Eisteddfod. There are learner categories, as there are special needs categories. I know Chris Ysgol y Derry did well this year in the arts and crafts. I went to see the winning entry up in Dinbych. I was there with the pupils from St Barwick myself. There are little small gains you could be doing for the overall ethos and culture of the school. And I think that would be your point of call, really, rather than one big thing, isn't it? It's just creeping in that ethos in that way. And there are many competitions for learners, so they could do it singular or as in a group form, depending. Start small and work up towards, isn't it? I suppose behaviour and social and emotional, because we had more staff in each class. So with the intention of improving their Welsh literary skills, they were in smaller groups. You were almost doing the personal and social with it. It goes hand in glove, doesn't it? So if you had themes, you could talk about emotions, any writing activities, any reading activities. Having additional adults just shares that. And if a child especially was distressed, you can deploy that LSA then to do more ELSA work with them, or you could arrange your staff around who needed that extra support. It's always having additional adults in school just puts the pressure off. Not everyone is sort of used to their max and sort of tight, isn't it? So if one goes, sometimes the whole thing collapses. By having additional adults, it takes that pressure away, I would say. We are now also engaging more in team sports. There are more opportunities coming to have competitions in football and rugby. The Aves do quite a lot of that, and we've signed up for everything. It's been interesting. We tend to take the older children. What I found is the children's way of dealing when they don't win. Somehow or other, by not doing team sports, now that we're together as a team, there's been this almost, well, can't comprehend that they would be out in the quarterfinals or not even make the quarterfinals. Do you know that the children are not used to being disappointed in that way? And my answer is, let's just do more team sports, and then they'll soon get used to it, isn't it? And learn to, well, you lost the game today. If you played that team again tomorrow, who knows what would have happened? Think of the Wales team. Think of last night's game, isn't it? You know, it's just life lessons. Being out, being together, doing things collaboratively. This is where learning is taking place, and it's lovely. We're doing whole school assemblies, we're singing, we're coming back together. We're doing less of this on screen, aren't we? We're doing more of connecting together.
Brilliant.
Just
Thanks.
Quickly, sorry, on the RRS thing, are teacher and LSA levels, what are they like compared to before pandemic? Does anyone?
What, insofar as?
Have we lost teachers and LSAs, or are we on par with before the pandemic, or are we needing to recruit LSAs and more teachers because of losses during the pandemic, people leaving the profession?
The recruitment for us of LSAs is proving increasingly difficult, and we are losing LSAs to other jobs. So LSAs nationally, their salaries are prorated, so they earn 75% roughly of what is advertised. So in many ways, I mean, they don't make enough money to stand on their own. You know, they don't make enough money to pay their own rent and you know, do all those things at this point in time. I think their pay, and I've raised it with the ministers, pretty grim actually for what we now expect. They don't just sit with readers any longer. You know, I'm sure Rian can tell you, but ours will undertake medicines, suction, gastro feeds. It's very sophisticated what they do in their responsibilities, and we need to address that because they're beginning to leave for much better paid jobs in all sorts of sectors now. And I know the situation is probably similar in health and social care, but it's definitely the same for us. And it's something we're going to need to address sooner rather than later. I think as a nation, not as a local authority, because that's a national agreement. And I wholeheartedly think it's wrong. The roles that they undertake now in schools are not, as I said, they don't put the paper away and sharpen the pencils. I'm sure Rian would say the same. You know, they have a very sophisticated role in developing and supporting learning. And in our sector, they're essential. I couldn't work without them. So it is becoming increasingly difficult to retain and hang on to support staff.
And also the grant allows you only if you were to recruit personally as a school, you would only offer a temporary contract, because obviously the grant, you just don't know where you are a year from now, where people are really loath to leave a permanent position to go for temporary. So what we find that most schools have done have turned to agencies. So by the time you're there, there are no staff left then in the agency. So it's been quite a challenge.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Councillor Penn. Rian, if those children want to get used to crushing disappointment, they can come and watch Cardiff City with me, and they'll get used to losing and failure pretty quickly, unfortunately. Charis, I saw you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Thomas. Can I just come back to one question that Councillor Penn raised about the Cogan nursery data? In terms of, yes, you'll see in the report there's reference to data for 2020, 2021, but the report was actually written back in March this year. So the school will be undertaking further assessments this term. So there will be information in the school, but it was not available when this report was drafted. So that's why there isn't any information about this current academic year, because the assessments hadn't taken place. They will be taking place this half term.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Charis. See two hands up. I saw Councillor Norman's was up first, so Councillor Norman.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for both heads, actually. Do you find there are still some children that are not, whose parents are not willing them to come back to full-time education? They're still very wary of the COVID being around, and they're unwilling for these children to return to the school environment.
So none for us now. We've done extensive work with them. We've done extensive work with parents and reassuring about the safeguards we've had in place. And we've worked, there were some who were very vulnerable and we've worked with their doctors, their paediatricians and nursing staff. So no, at this point, Councillor Norman, we don't have any who are not coming due to COVID.
No, nor us either. No, that's a success.
Oh, that's very good to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Norman. Councillor Payne.
Thank you both. Jane, I was going to ask the same question, but I wanted to develop it a little bit more. And I think it's to Paula as well, because it's kind of along those lines of pupils returning to school. So there was a rise in homeschooling across the board, and I was looking at this grant. Was any of that grant aimed at homeschooled children or pupils, or was it simply for school-based learning?
Shall I come in there in response to that? I don't think the RRS grant was aimed at electively home educated pupils, but there was a separate grant given for elective home education, and part of that went out to each family, and I can't remember the exact amount off the top of my head, but certainly there has been some support.
Okay, thanks very much.
Would you mind if I come in there as well, Chair, please?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, thank you. Just to follow up what Paula has said, yeah, the Triple RS didn't cover children who were electively home educated, but as Paula said, there was an additional grant and there was additional funding. And what we've done as a local authority this year is provide additional support as well as funding directly to families. And I don't know the exact amount either, but there have been additional wellbeing sessions, for example, swimming sessions for parents and their children as well. So a number of activities like that, which parents were consulted on in advance in a programme put together, which could then help them support their children too. So that has all been in addition this year to what we've ever done previously. And as you said, Councillor Payne, the numbers have increased of children who are electively home educated. But what we have seen in the Vale of Glamorgan, even though we were quite alarmed by the increase, it's not as much of an increase as in other local authorities across Wales. And we believe it's because of the additional support we've had engaging directly with families to reassure them of the measures that were in place for children in schools, of as both Chris and Rhian have suggested, that has definitely made a difference, and that direct engagement between officers and families has in many cases allayed those fears and has persuaded parents that actually school will be the best place and it is a safe environment for their children. Because you will probably understand that if children do become electively home educated, and if parents do then change their mind, they've then got to go through an admissions process, and there's no guarantee they would then be able to secure a place for their child in the school that they want or in the area that they live. So, there's been a huge amount of work and support from officers with parents directly. Despite the increase in numbers, we actually are quite happy that we've done everything we possibly can to support in all manners.
Thank you, Mo. Maybe we need to tell people about that. Maybe we need to sell what we do a little bit better, I think. There's not been much press around that, and I think it's a really positive thing that, you've all been doing as officers, so well done.
Thank you. I'll share that with my team.
Thank you. Councillor Goodjohn.
Hello, yes. I am an elective home educated family. I've home educated both of my children. My eldest son is now elected a councillor at 18. So, and I would like to say my youngest is 13, and I would like to applaud you because my youngest at 13 is getting a lot of support now with the YMCA sessions, and we do the swimming as well. So it's very good. But I do think that you should try and engage more with the home educating families because it's a very, very good, it's a good resource. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Goodjohn. It's really good to hear. I'm sure you will appreciate that as a team of officers who support children who are electively home educated, it's always been a very small team. We have expanded it quite a lot, but as with many aspects of our work, we are under pressure and we do everything we possibly can to engage with families and children to provide all the support we can, and resources are stretched. But I will pass that on to the team, and I know that they will continue to do everything they possibly can. But thank you for that.
Thank you, that's awesome.
Thanks for that, Councillor Marshalsea.
Hello, yeah, just from reading the report, to be honest, I was just really impressed. I think that using additional staff, which is basically what all of the examples chose to do, is clearly and obviously the best way to do it. And I was just thought it was brilliant, to be honest. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Got a couple of other hands. Christopher, did you want to come in?
Well, only if there are no other questions. I was just going to extend an invitation to members of Scrutiny to come and visit the school when it's in session at some point, because we're now able to do that. And you might like to see the work of the school in session. If you've never been in a special school or seen what goes on, then I think you'll be impressed. I think it'll be useful for you, because I'm sure discussions around additional learning needs are going to feature quite heavily in your agendas in the coming weeks and months. Paula is nodding, and I always think it's really, we've had members come round before, and I think they've enjoyed the visit, and the coffee's very good, and the pupils will make you some excellent cakes. So if you would like to come, I'm sure one of your organising officers can sort that for you. It'd be lovely to welcome you.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, if there's cake and coffee, I'm very easy on that, so I'll definitely be there. I just wanted to ask you a question myself about ALN implementation. Obviously, we're going through in Wales a big sort of rejig and reform of the ALN system. Obviously, at the same time as we're sort of coming out of COVID and the lockdowns and the pandemic. I know that things like the individual development plans and things of that nature must be tougher than what the special needs provisions were before. So I'm just wondering if any of this funding was used for things like that, and how you sort of look at in the future, the rest of the academic year and the future academic years, what sort of funding you'd be needing to implement things like that effectively.
So I'm sure Paula and Charis are better placed. There is an additional funding stream to support the implementation of the Act. Whether it's enough is a moot question. I do think that the demands, particularly upon mainstream schools, I have a specialist team who look after IDPs and annual reviews, but then that's the nature of our business. But I think for mainstream schools who'll be writing IDPs perhaps for the first time, and these are legal documents that could be challenged through judicial review, I think is quite daunting, quite intimidating. I know that we are working really hard to support our mainstream colleagues and their Elencos. We have a specialist IDP manager who works for us, who provides advice to all our mainstream schools as well, because we see a lot of our work as supporting our mainstream schools. They're all our pupils at the end of the day, and we are there and your provision for those pupils. So there are huge challenges around it, and not least in terms, I think, of release and time to do. So you have this concept of person-centered planning, this focus, which is all well and good, but to do proper person-centered planning takes time and effort, and it takes resource, and I'm not sure there's enough resource in the system to do that really well. Equally, I'm not sure there's enough resource in the system to make health provision for pupils in terms of therapies, etc. And the Act certainly doesn't place upon health all the things that it ought to in terms of forcing them to provide. There are too many get-out clauses in it, and for a nation which has primary legislative powers over health and education, I thought that in the end the Act was weakened and it placed more duties on education, which if health chose not to provide, education would have to find the funds and the resources. Sorry, Paula, I don't think I've spoken out of turn. I hope not, but Paula will tell me off later.
No, I agree with everything you're saying, but I can see that David Davis has got his hand up, and he's well versed in all of this, and will probably say what I was going to say. So perhaps, Chair, we can bring David in on this.
Yeah, happy to bring David in.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with anything that Chris has said. I think the sentiments behind the Act are extremely positive. It is just a challenge around the implementation and the funding associated with that. But I would say that it's been a challenge training, providing the correct training and the time for the training for the new additional learning needs coordinators, the Elencos in schools. And we've had fantastic commitment from head teachers and from Elencos themselves to release those staff. There has been funding made available from Welsh Government to backfill the majority of that. But it's still, throughout COVID, when you've already heard of the pressures on staffing, for schools to be able to release Elencos for, you know, whole days every half term, which we've been asking them to do, has been a push. But you know, I think there's remarkable progress being made in relation to that. The Welsh Government have softened, I think is probably the best word, the implementation framework to stagger it more. So only certain groups, only certain year groups are being part of the Act, and it's incrementally going to build up over the years. So the year that it will really be challenged will be the academic year 23-24, when everybody will be online in the Act by then. And you know, that's when the system will really become under pressure. However, having said that, the system is under pressure anyway, because the increase in need that is in the system. And I think Councillor Penn asked a question earlier about the impact of COVID on social, emotional, mental health of children and young people. Those who have, you know, previously been on the Scrutiny Committee will be well versed with the work that the ongoing work that we've been doing around well-being, and we'd identified increasing social, emotional, mental health issues as a major challenge for schools and education prior to the pandemic. And in 2019, we had a social, emotional, mental health action plan put in place, and we had lots of training. We had a conference for head teachers, and we launched the trauma-informed schools approach, and there's a huge amount of work being gone into that. So that was prior to the pandemic. The pandemic itself has turbocharged, for the want of a better word, those issues, and I think all schools are really seeing the impact, the social impact of COVID now, rather than perhaps the medical impact that we've been dealing with for a long time. So yes, major challenges ahead. The ALN reform is very positive on many respects, but funding will be an issue. But I think ALN funding is an issue anyway, and it is something that we're very mindful of, and have been very well supported by the council up to this point as well, I must say. Yeah, I'm sure we'll come back to these issues. I won't keep going, but yeah, you know, I'm sure we'll have lots of interesting conversations about it in the coming months and years, maybe. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. I'm certain we won't be having those conversations. So lots to talk about there. And just finally from me, I mean, maybe the officers can help with this, but for Rhiannon as well. You know, it was good that you could use the funding to sort of appoint Welsh language teachers, and I think that's a really great use of the funding. But you mentioned sort of beyond that there weren't as many teachers to sort of employ as you would have liked. Even though the ones you employed were good, there wasn't the sort of well of Welsh language teachers that you were able to pick up, which is quite disappointing. And obviously we've got Cymraeg 2050 and the million speaker goal by 2050 and things of that nature. I mean, what's the problem in your view? Obviously, you've got the quality teachers who've come to you, but beyond that, there's not very much, which is a big concern for me to hear. So in your view, what's the problem?
People wanting to come into the profession. I think Chris touched upon it. Or people retaining people, they'll start in the profession, but they will leave, perhaps better paid jobs. Even teachers, not necessarily support staff, and their wages are, you know, an obvious matter. But even on a teacher's wage, the pressures of the job, you're not just teaching, you feel you're a social worker, you're a parent, you're working with families. There's so many other things to the role now rather than just teaching. So retaining, even if you recruit, you might not necessarily retain. Yeah, people coming in to the profession, the universities, people to come in to do PGCEs or teacher training. Not sure of the numbers, but the number of Welsh medium schools are increasing. But I don't know if the number of teacher training students are increasing at the same rate. I'm not sure. Charis, what do you know?
In terms of to support this work, I can make reference to the plan that the Welsh Government have recently launched to try and make, in a sense, more attractive profession for people, and to try and engage even people who have just finished sixth form, for example, to try and get them to have experience of working in a primary school or secondary school, so that they've got that contact with the education sector. So the Welsh Government has just launched an medium schools to apply for either in a cluster or on an individual basis to enable them to hopefully attract people. But as you know, Rhian has mentioned some of that, and Chris has mentioned, you know, previously as well, it's just a challenge then in terms of retaining people in the profession.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that, everyone. Has anyone else got any questions on this topic? One last call. Okay. So I want to thank Charis for the presentation. I want to thank Chris and Rhian for coming and spending their evening talking to us. I'm sure I can speak for everyone when I say we really appreciate it, and it's a great insight. And round of applause. Thank you, and thank you, Chris, for the invitation as well. And I'll speak for myself. I'll come along. I'm sure Councillor Marshalsea will as well. So we'll get a little posse and come and try the cake.
Okay, you'd be very welcome.
Brilliant. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.
I'd also extend the invitation to St Patrick, but I would just say wait until the new school opens, Paula. What do you think?
Yeah, good idea, Rhian.
You could hold a meeting in the school if you want. We are more than welcome.
That sounds good to me. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Power.
Really appreciate it.
Oil.
Cheers. So that brings that to a close. So if we could note the report, I think, and the recommendations, if that's okay with everyone, if we could have a proposer for that.
Yeah, I'll propose it, Chair. Helen Payne.
Thanks, Councillor. Seconder, anyone?
Naomi Marshalsea, I'll second it.
Thanks both, brilliant. So I'll move on now. So we're going back to what was originally agenda point 6, which is the annual Equality Monitoring Report 20 to 21. Tom Bowering is here. Yes, he's just appeared on my screen. Good to see you, Tom. Over to you.
Great stuff. Thanks very much indeed, Chair. And thanks for taking this reference this evening from Cabinet. I'm Tom Bowering. I'm the Director of Corporate Resources. And as Paula was saying in her introductory presentation, the committee's remit also includes Equalities and Welsh Language Matters. So you'll be seeing me and some of my colleagues in the coming months, alongside my colleagues from Learning and Skills as well. Apologies, I'm a little bit croaky this evening. I've been on meetings all day and my voice is about to give up, but hopefully it'll get through this item okay for you. So the report that's been referred to you this evening was considered by Cabinet on the 25th of April. At Cabinet, they approved the annual Equality Monitoring Report for 2020 to 21, referring it to your committee for consideration, so any comments can go back to Cabinet for them to consider in due course. The annual Equality Monitoring Report refers to the 20 to 21 year. I have asked my colleagues in Equalities if we can try and bring the 2021 to 22 report to your committee, Chair, in the early autumn, so that it's not quite as far in retrospect as this particular version is. And what the report does is seek to outline how the Council has undertaken its work in association with the Public Sector Equality Duty, which is referred to as the general duty, and there are also some specific duties that are applicable to Wales. And the way that those duties operate is that we need to publish an annual report that talks about the work that the council has done in order to meet the commitments that are published in our 4-year strategic equality plan. So that plan runs from 2020 to 2024. So the report that's in front of you this evening is structured so as to meet those duties, and the Equality Act suggests that we need to set out some background information, so what's the purpose of the report and how we've gone about developing it. It also outlines for you, Chair, the steps that the Council has taken to identify and collect relevant information, and equally importantly, why we may not have collected information. And councillors will note that this report refers to the first year of the pandemic, so there was some disruption to council services, as you'd expect, and therefore also to the collection and provision of this information, but we've tried to make it as complete as possible. The report also talks about how the council has gone about using this information to meet the aims of the duty and the effectiveness by which we feel that we have done so. So it talks really in terms of the main body of the report about how we've gone about progressing activity associated with the 10 strategic equality objectives. So that makes up the bulk of the report. So in terms of those equality objectives, the first is to improve how we involve, engage and communicate with protected groups about the work and decisions that we make as an organisation. So in the report this year, Chair, there are references to consultation exercises that have been undertaken, including the work that's also underway to support the Council's diversity networks. The second of the 10 objectives is around continuing to reduce the gender pay gap in the council and identifying whether there's a pay gap for ethnic minorities, and also to report on those both annually. Work to identify the ethnic minority pay gap is underway. In terms of the reducing gender pay gap, that has been reducing quite significantly in recent years. So, for example, that stood at just under 14% in 2018. It's stayed roughly average around 5.4% in the last few years. And that was as a result of some changes that were made to the council's pay structure back in 2018. Committee will also note that this afternoon Cabinet endorsed proposals to increase the rate of pay for the lowest 2 pay grades on the council's pay structure. That will have a positive impact on the gender pay gap, because 90% of those colleagues who are employed in those 2 pay rates are female. The third of the objectives is around improving employment opportunities for protected groups, particularly focusing in on disabled people and young people, and that's done to more accurately reflect the diversity of the local population. Significant work has been underway in terms of the attraction strategy to the organisation, so looking at different approaches to the way that we recruit our colleagues, the use of social media, different imagery, different language in the way that we describe our work. The fourth of the objectives is around developing a more inclusive work environment at the council, supporting staff from all backgrounds to reach their potential. That's a demonstration of the way that we look to involve as many people as possible in the kind of culture of the organisation, Chair. So there are some examples here in terms of our commitment to being a Stonewall member. We complete the Workplace Equality Index measure every year. We have established staff networks called GLAM for LGBTQ+ colleagues and their allies, and also Diverse for Black and minority ethnic colleagues and their allies. And there's also a corporate engagement group made up of interested colleagues from across the organisation who want to get involved in helping to shape the work to make our organisation more inclusive. The fifth of the objectives around providing support and development to elected members on equalities issues. The report for the 2021 year references training, for example, on race awareness matters, and also reports that have been presented to the Council's Cabinet on the socio-economic duty. Objective 6 is around developing and implementing plans to address the attainment gaps for children and young people, and to provide support to overcome barriers for them reaching their potential. There are some examples in the report before you this evening around the introduction of a model anti-bullying policy, for example, and how the monitoring and evaluation of that data is used to respond to particular trends. There's also quite significant analysis of attainment gaps included in the report, and some information about how my colleagues in Learning and Skills are going about using that alongside our schools colleagues. The 7th of our equality objectives is around developing and implementing processes throughout the life of the plan to address hate crime, violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. There's significant collaborative effort that goes into that particular arena. The report talks about the work of our community safety partnership, a primary partnership with South Wales Police in that particular area, and members will note the particular strains of the pandemic on issues such as domestic abuse. So there's some information in the report about the activities that partnership has undertaken. The 8th of the equality objectives is around considering different housing needs of people with protected characteristics and how our work impacts on them. That objective is about taking action to address any disproportionate impact on those groups. The report for 2020-21 sets out some information around how, for example, the housing allocation process has been reviewed for disabled people. The purpose of that review was to extend the potential accommodation that would be available to disabled people, and by doing so provide reasonable and appropriate adaptations. There's also information within the report about how my colleagues in housing have provided support for people with issues such as debt and money advice. The penultimate of the strategic equality objectives is around working in partnership to consider issues that relate to transport accessibility. There's a particular emphasis, Chair, within that objective on disabled people and older people. And the report gives some information around how we've continued to promote the concessionary travel scheme aimed at older people, and also physical changes to infrastructure such as bus stops, the provision of drop curbs, and also electronic and voice signage, so easier for people with hearing impairments, etc. There's also some information within the report about the additional disabled parking bays that were provided, and examples there about Barry Island. And the final of the strategic equality objectives is around developing and implementing plans to promote our natural and built environment and cultural heritage, including accessibility to protected groups. This equality objective came through very strongly during the consultation on the strategic equality plan itself. People wanting to recognise the Vale of Glamorgan as an area that has a huge amount of rich natural resources that we want as many people to be able to enjoy as possible. And there are some examples within the report that, notwithstanding the level of COVID restrictions that were in place during this reporting period, but the examples given around the Strong Communities Grant Fund, which is a fund the council is committed to over a number of years, which is designed to help support community groups to improve their resilience. And it shows how there's been a predominantly positive impact on improving engagement with protected groups through that particular grant scheme. So that's the part of the report that is associated with our strategic equality objectives. We also have to, under the duty, include some specific information, Chair, for example, relating to training and pay, specifically around the gender pay gap. We also have a duty to include within that report other relevant matters. So there's a section in there that shows things about how the organisation works, enabling us to deliver those equality objectives. So, for example, how we undertake equality impact assessments and use data and information to inform elected members' decision, the kind of procurement requirements we put in place, different organisations and schemes, for example, that the council is part of. I've mentioned Stonewall Disability Confident is another example of that, and how we undertake to deliver training to support our colleagues in this particular arena. You'll see within the report there's quite a substantial number of appendices. I like to make sure that elected members can see our workings, and the workings here are the returns that we get from each of our colleague representatives of different services. So you can see the contribution that is made by all parts of the organisation to the delivery of this particular plan. As I mentioned, the particular year that this report refers to did present some challenges. We were operating services in very different ways. The amount of data that was being collected and reported was suspended by a number of our national regulators. So there are some gaps in the information, and we've sought to try and plug those as far as we can do. So that's a really quick tour through the annual equality monitoring report, Chair. As I say, Cabinet have referred it to your committee this evening for their consideration, and any comments and questions can go back to Cabinet then.
Brilliant, thank you, Tom. I see we've got a hand up already from Councillor Norman, so Councillor Norman, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. Just a quickie, reading through your report, Objective 2 on the electrical services. Do we have any idea, I know it's short notice, but do we have any idea of the percentage of turnout in the Vale? And if so, how many of these were the newly registered members, the youngsters, the 17-year-olds? Do we have any idea of those numbers yet, or are they still in the pipeline, so to speak?
Thank you, Councillor Norman. I can certainly, I don't know the turnout figure off the top of my head. It was a very, very long day and night, wasn't it?
Wasn't it just, yes.
For all of you. And I can't remember the turnout off the top of my head, but with your permission, Chair, I'll ask colleagues in Democratic Services to circulate that to members by email. We wouldn't be in a position, unfortunately, Councillor Norman, to be able to identify the turnout by different age groups. We can do it by electoral ward, but not by the individuals who have voted. What I can ask my colleagues in electoral services to provide is some information in terms of the registration uptake of young people. I know certainly we've been tracking that very closely as a result of some of the campaigns to increase voter participation, particularly in those age groups. So I can undertake to get some further information and provide that following the meeting.
Thank you for that one. And the second one is Objective 5 about the information and support education. I don't know about other councillors. This isn't probably the place to do it. I've had terrible trouble with IDEV, and I think quite a few other people have. And I do think it's very, very difficult for a lot of people to get onto the internet and get the support. The IT department is very, very overworked at the moment. And I think, like a lot of people, until this, this is ironed out, I think a lot of us are going to have problems with this development here. That's all really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Norman, and it's always useful to have had feedback from elected members in terms of access to our IT systems. What I can do is ask my colleagues in the organisational development team to get in touch with you to make sure that any particular issues are ironed out, and make sure that if you do have any issues, by all means come and raise them with me, and I can discuss those with my IT.
There have been 2 requests put in, actually. I'm still waiting.
I'll get straight on to that after the meeting, Councillor Norman.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Norman. I think it was Councillor Payne next.
Okay. Hi, Tom. Thank you for that. Took me about 15 minutes to scroll just through that report, so well done. It was very, very long. I think, I did try to get through most of it. There was looking at the data around disability I'm interested in, really. In terms of mental health, I would be interested to know what are the incidences specifically of mental health issues as opposed to disability. It would be interesting to collect that data, particularly in light post-pandemic data, in terms of staff workforce as well. And I would be interested in having some kind of a briefing in terms of equalities, in terms of the data, how it's collected. I'd like to know that in terms of scrutiny, so that next time it's presented, I would have more, well, we'd all have more of an idea of what we're looking at, if that makes sense?
Absolutely, Councillor Payne, that makes perfect sense. In terms of mental health, I can certainly have a look at some of the data that we have in terms of absence information, for example, for council colleagues. We took a report on the 6 monthly monitoring of absence to Cabinet this afternoon. So I can ask Democratic Services colleagues to circulate that. That'll give you a kind of holistic view of absence by staff in the organisation. We are also, Paul and I were discussing a strategic leadership team last week, starting some work around the impact of the pandemic on children and young people's mental health. There's a significant amount of work that is underway within schools, within youth services, other community groups and elsewhere within the council. But we are seeing that as an increasing area of concern for the organisation. So we are looking to establish some cross-council work to try and bring that together and look at what else that we can do. And I know that Paul and I will be getting some information back to SLT in the coming weeks on that I would expect to start to come through to elected members as well. We do have a couple of sessions in the diary with all elected members on equalities now in the coming few weeks. You'll be meeting my colleague Nicola and I during those sessions, and we'll be giving you exactly, I hope, what you've just described, a bit of a background to the equality duty, exactly what the strategic equality plan looks like and contains, and a bit more information about the kind of work that the organisation does both internally and externally in this arena.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Marshalsea next.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I can't remember what number it was, but from reading the report, so I had someone raise on the doorstep that in their child's school, for example, there was some work and some lessons around different countries, and within some of these lessons, some of the countries were France, Spain, and then Africa was raised as a country. Now, obviously, we're well aware that this shouldn't be the case, and the difference between Nairobi and Kenya or South Africa, Ethiopia is obviously completely different, and I really feel it's nothing intentional by a member of staff, of course, but some sort of training in sort of cultural appropriateness almost with school staff is probably quite needed, particularly in the Vale, where we don't necessarily have the cultural diversity that like Cardiff, for example, might have. And going through this report, that was something that from chatting to people within my ward, it's something that really came to the forefront of my mind.
Do you want to come in on that?
I'll come in on that. There is a lot of work going on actually with schools, but I would agree with you that we've got a long way to go as well for that to be embedded. So a lot of training going on, but yeah, we have seen some recent instances where in spite of that training, there have been issues that have arisen within school. So as I said, still a lot of work to do, and we are aware of that.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Penn, next.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions on the report in sort of general and a bit more specific. Has the pandemic significantly affected one group more than another? This is a bit of a scattergun, so forgive me. Does procurement consider obligations under the Equalities Act when considering them? Does it also take into account environmental impacts? Sometimes distance against cost should be taken into account because of environmental impacts. Just on funding, there were summer workshops, Welsh Government funded. Is there funding for summer workshops this year? The other part was The cultural recovery grants, are they still available? Round one in the top up. And lastly, what are the numbers of Gypsy and Roma travellers in full-time education, and how do they perform as a group, if those are relevant?
Thank you, Councillor Penn. My apologies. I was scribbling them down to make sure that that I can answer as many as possible. I may well be handing back over to my learning and skills colleagues in a moment. In terms of the overall picture of the impact of the pandemic on people with protected characteristics, we undertook some work in the autumn of 2020 and again then in the spring of 2021 on a piece of work that we called the community impact of COVID within the Vale. What we sought there to do was to try and bring together as much information nationally, regionally, and then locally as possible, and look at it through the lens, I guess, of people with different protected characteristics. Also, not forgetting that people can fall into those different combinations of protected characteristics as well, of course. And I can certainly circulate that information for elected members. I think the summary of that was that if people were previously negatively impacted, the COVID pandemic made things worse, but it made them worse in different ways. So the way that people experienced the pandemic was different. Loneliness and social isolation was a very clear theme, for example, but that was experienced differently depending on whether it was somebody with physical disabilities, whether it was somebody who was older, for example. So I can certainly send that information out. That might be really useful kind of context for elected members to see exactly how that issue manifested itself. In terms of our procurement process, we're actually undertaking a review now of the council's procurement policy. The current policy was written in 2018. The world has moved on a huge amount. You raise the environmental impact, for example, councillor, and Project Zero and the council's commitment to become carbon neutral by 2030 is something that is new, and it needs to be reflected within the procurement policy. We know a lot of our carbon emissions are within our supply chain. We need to be addressing that. And also we need to be addressing within that procurement policy issues of social value. So picking up on employability and the kind of legacy of our procurement on people within the Vale of Glamorgan. So looking at how we can learn, for example, from Paula's colleagues on the 21st Century Schools programme, where community benefits, apprenticeships and local purchasing are really embedded within that programme. How can we learn from that as an organisation? And that will have positive impacts on people with protected characteristics. In terms of the summer workshops, my understanding is that the Summer of Fun funding has been confirmed for this year. That's where I'm going to hand over to Paula, if I may, around cultural recovery grants and attainment for Gypsy and Roma travellers.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid to disappoint you on cultural recovery grants because I don't have any information on that. I don't know whether Trevor does, but I suspect the cultural recovery grants are not accessible by local government because we're not aware of those grants. So that might be by independent arts and culture venues. In terms of the attainment to Gypsy Roma traveller, that has been relatively good. What I haven't got in front of me is what impact COVID would have had on the engagement of that vulnerable group, because you might be aware that obviously attendance overall has been impacted by COVID, and there are still some vulnerable groups and certain pupils that we are still working with to get them back into school, so they haven't all come back in. What I don't know is how many of those might be Gypsy Roma traveller. It might be helpful for us to bring a separate report to Scrutiny on that in the future. Our vulnerable groups manager, Martin Coles, deals with various groups, including young carers, Gypsy Roma travellers, looked after children and so on, or children looked after, I should say. What we can't do is to report separately on their attainment because of the changes to the accountability framework, but we can inform you about the progress they're making and, you know, how they've been impacted by the pandemic. I can see Morwen's pops up on my screen, and she might have more to add because this comes under her part of the business.
Unfortunately, I don't have a great deal more that I can add. It's such a small group of learners that we can't make relevant comparisons really anyway, even if we have the data. And, you know, you'll be aware that we haven't got any outcomes for this current academic year. They won't be known until the summer. Last academic year, I know that the results were very strong. We do have quite a number who attend Cowbridge Comprehensive School, and the relationships between the local authority in Cowbridge and the parents of that particular group of learners are very, very strong, and the young people themselves are really well supported. And I think I'm right in saying that last summer, but it might have been the summer before, one of our Gypsy Roma traveller pupils from Cowbridge actually moved on to university education. So a real success story there of one of those learners. So, you know, as without the data in front of me, I can't give you accurate information, but it is certainly not a group about whom we have concerns with their performance. But as Paula has suggested, it is something that we could bring back to scrutiny in the future if you so wish.
Thank you, Councillor Penn, for that. I can't see any other questions at the moment. But Tom, I just know that you mentioned that. I just want to say thank you for the report. First of all, it was the first one I've read as chairman, and it was long and detailed and interesting, and I hope they're all as incisive as that. But you mentioned that the council's part of the Stonewall Diversity Scheme. And quite a lot in the document Stonewall reference their advice and things of that nature. And the council also references the EHRC, so the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So on page 6, you sort of say that there's a legal basis for the EHRC's guidance in these areas. Now, I see that the EHRC have withdrawn from the Stonewall Diversity Scheme themselves. And I'm concerned that there are some cases where Stonewall have given incorrect legal advice. So the Reindorf review, so Aqua Reindorf, who's a barrister who specialises in discrimination and equality, did a report last year saying that Stonewall's advice on these matters, Stonewall states the law as Stonewall would prefer it to be rather than the law as it is. Now, I'm sure we can all agree here that the Equality Act is of the utmost importance and crucial to everything that we do. But it seems to me that EHRC are the ones who uphold the law and the Equality Act, where I'm not sure that Stonewall necessarily does. So my question is, who did the council listen to in these instances where there may be tension between the different advice, and who makes the decision on whether you take advice from the EHRC or from Stonewall?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose from my perspective, those two organisations serve two different purposes for us as an organisation. So the EHRC, as you say, almost make the rules, I guess, and we work very closely with them on the general equalities matters. In terms of our membership of Stonewall, we have, and we undertake a review every year as to whether we want to remain committed to being a member of Stonewall and to undertake the Workplace Equalities Index. And we do that because we value their advice, and it is advice that the council then considers, and where appropriate, we'll report it through to elected members as to whether we're going to adopt that or not. If there are specific issues that we're looking for advice, the council has an established legal services team who we will always look to consult. And I suppose that's just one example of where we work with a range of different organisations to get a kind of holistic picture. But ultimately, the decision making remains with us unless there's a statutory body that's in place, like the HRC, that will be setting out specific ways that we need to work and execute our duties. So I think for me, they serve two slightly different purposes.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Is there anyone else? Councillor Penn, I can see the virtual hand. Over to you. Is that?
Sorry, legacy hand.
Legacy hand.
Apologies.
There we go. No worries. Thanks, Councillor Penn. Just so you know, is there anyone else you'd like to ask a question? No, I don't think so.
Sorry, Chair, can I move to notes, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Helen. So, Helen proposing, do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I just want to say thank you to Tom for coming in and speaking to us, and for you and everyone else who's worked on the report. It's really interesting and a lot to think about in there. So thanks for coming, Tom. Brilliant. Okay, so that's second report of the night done. So we'll be moving on now to agenda item 8. So this is the report of the Chief Executive for scrutiny recommendation tracking and the proposed annual forward work programme. So Amy Rudman is going to be leading on that. So hello, Amy.
Hello, good evening, everybody. The voice that you always hear on everything has suddenly got a face. Hello. It's lovely to see you all. Just very quickly, this is a rolling report. It will be new to our new members this evening, but this report comes to you as a committee on a quarterly basis, so it will quickly become something that's very familiar to you. You'll see that there's various appendices within that report. In a nutshell, what this report is asking is, do you agree that the actions that have been given to previous decisions of the committee, are you happy that those are accurate? And the second part is, are you happy for me to publish the forward work programme for this committee on our public website as it's included in the report? So that's what this does in a nutshell, those two things. So you'll see from, I believe it's Appendix A. Let me just scroll that myself. Yeah, so Appendix A is looking at the recommendations, the decisions of this committee for the period January to March 22. Now, I appreciate that not all members of the committee here now were still a member of that committee then, but you'll see that the two actions, there's only 2 actions on there that are marked as completed, so they're not outstanding. So I'm just asking if the members who do recall that are happy to go with those. Appendix B then is looking at how the forward work programme, what state that was in before the election. And I'm pleased to announce that there's only 2 items that have been slipped over into this side of the election, and they are picked up in the committee's forward work programme that is attached to Appendix D, so what's going forward. So we certainly haven't lost sight of them. We're carrying them forward, and you'll see those 2 items that have slipped. There's a description of why, a comment for why that's happened in the far right hand column. So in terms of the overall health of the committee, moving from before the election into this current state is very good. And Appendix C is the Cabinet Annual Forward Work Programme. So Cabinet do have their annual work programme, and we as a scrutiny committee have to make sure that we've taken account of that, and that's reflected in our own forward work programme here for this scrutiny committee. And I can confirm that I've double checked that is the case, and it definitely is. So those items are picked up in what is Appendix D. So Appendix D is where we are now for the forward work programme for this committee. It includes anything that's rolled over prior to the election, and also what we're looking forward through the future based on the Cabinet Annual Forward Work Programme, but also what the other reports that will come to this committee on a rolling basis, or previous pieces of work that we've asked to be included. So just to quickly summarise and go back to what I mentioned at the start, this report is asking, are you happy with the Appendix A and the statuses, that are the 2 confirmed statuses in there? And are you also happy for me to publish the Forward Work Programme on the public website so members of the public are able to see what's coming forward in the future for this committee? I would like to add a little caveat that this Forward Work Programme is a rolling document. It fluctuates constantly. It's monitored very carefully by myself in partnership with the chairman of this committee. So it's one of those documents where once it's published, it can automatically become out of date because things are moving and fluctuating all the time. But all I'd ask is, are you happy with me to publish that as it is now? And of course, you will see it again very soon when the next quarter, when this is brought before you. So I believe that's all just for myself, Chair. But as a little side point, I would like to take the opportunity, if you don't mind, just to mention to the new members on the committee that there is a call-in process and a request for consideration for scrutiny committee process that is set in our constitution, and both of those processes are available to you as members of the scrutiny committee should you wish to take those up based on cabinet decisions or general inquiries you may have from constituents for matters that you'd like to bring before the committee. So if you want to get any advice on those processes, please reach out to myself or any other member of the scrutiny team and the Democratic Services team, and we can give you some advice on that, and I'll drop you all an email with some further information on that after the meeting. So that's it from me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I see Councillor Hodges has got a hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As an old stager, I've looked through these and I'm content that the 4 recommendations should be agreed and that the programme should be published. We made good progress last time. I'm content that it's accurate, and I'm sure we'll keep this up. And there'll be plenty of new stuff coming on, I'm sure. Thank you. So I move.
Brilliant. Well, if an old stager is happy, then
I second.
Then who am I to question it? So brilliant, seconded by Councillor Norman. So there we go. All the experience says we're good with it. So brilliant. Thanks for that, Amy.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. So we're moving on to the final item now. This is down as an urgent item, very excitingly. And it's regarding 2 vacancies. So one on the schools budget forum and one on the schools admissions forum. So we'll go with the schools budget forum first of all, and just take expressions of interest to see if anyone would like to do those roles.
I would like to nominate Emma Goodjohn, if possible.
Sure. Got a seconder.
I can second that. Helen Payne.
Thank you, Helen. Any other expressions of interest? I want to make sure I see. Okay. Councillor Goodjohn, then, congratulations for the schools budget forum. And now second of all for the schools admissions forum. So the same process. If anyone wants to propose.
I'd like to
nominate Naomi Marshall-C, please.
Right. Second.
Yeah, Councillor Penn, I'd like to second Naomi, please.
Thank you, Councillor Penn.
I'd like to nominate myself, please.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. Anyone seconder for Jane?
Yes, I'll second Jane, but can I just express that when it comes to school places, that there's been issues over the last few years in actually getting people who have expressed desires for Welsh medium education. There's been a number for some years that haven't been able to take that up. So I'd like someone who's capable of fighting that cause, please. I second Jane.
Thank you, Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Nick.
So we'll go to a vote. Amy, if I could have your input here.
Yes, absolutely, Chair. So you obviously have 2 nominations on the table for you this evening for the same role for the admissions representative. So you'll need to take a vote in order of the nominations received. So your first nomination was for Councillor Marshalsea. So if we could take a vote from each committee member, please, with regards to that.
Okay.
And then we can confirm the results of that once we've concluded the vote. So if you need a list of your members, Chair, they are on the second page of your agenda front sheet for ease.
Fantastic. I knew it was somewhere simple that I was missing in my pile of papers with notes all over them. Okay. Okay, so I'll kick off then. Councillor Asbury, I think might have had to leave. Councillor Godfrey? No. Councillor Gilligan? Councillor Goodjohn?
I vote Naomi Rossay.
Thank you. Councillor Hennessy is absent. Councillor Hodges?
Councillor Jane Norman.
Thank you. Councillor Lynch-Wilson?
Naomi.
Thank you. Councillor Marshalsea?
Do I vote for myself?
I think
I have to in Welsh medium school as well, by the way.
Good. I think we just needed that, certainty there. Thank you. Same for Councillor Norman.
I vote for myself.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Naomi Marshalsea.
Thank you. And Councillor Penn.
Councillor Naomi Marshalsea.
Okay. Okay, thank you, everyone. So congratulations to Councillor Marshalsea. Well-deserved bow. So Councillor Goodjohn and Councillor Marshalsea will be our representatives on the budget forum and the admissions forum. So congratulations to both of you. And I think that's it, Amy. That's the meeting, unless I'm mistaken.
No, that's correct, Chair. That concludes your urgent item under Part 1, and you do not have any urgent items under Part 2.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Thanks for your help, Amy. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope you've enjoyed this and got a lot out of it. I know I have, and I really appreciate all the questions and engagement and people from the council who've come and everyone who's explained reports and answered questions and things like that. So it's been really good to have this session. The next meeting's penciled in for July 7th. I know we had some discussions before about maybe moving the date, so I'll be in touch regarding that. But thank you, everyone, for coming, and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Chair. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.